Let's go to Martijn.
Thank you, Sabine, for reaching out and giving the opportunity to meet so many wonderful, like-minded people. Yes, I want to introduce you to polarization, and we've been researching that for like decades. But if you do that for such a long time, you also, see other lenses that you can take for looking at the world. And now the world is in so much turmoil, and there are so many challenges, economic and geopolitical, and of course, environmental. I think it's time to, share a bit more about other dimensions than only the polarization dimensions, and how you can navigate that for impact. Because with these insights, so not only with awareness, but with research insights and data, you can steer in directions that are more beneficial. And there's a rapid technological, of course, revolution going on with AI. We utilize it also. There's a mental health crisis among the young generation. So it's time to look deeper. And that's what we are specialized in at Glocalities. Because there are so many like seeds that want to flourish, that have a natural impulse to flourish, also among the young generation. But, we don't create the right circumstances collectively, but we can. And that is what we are researching. So this presentation of the Glocalities research follows a journey. First, I will tell you a bit about the study that we launched last week, the flourishing fabric, and you can download it at our website. Glocalities.com/report, and then flourishing fabric. I will tell you more about that because this is the direction for renewal. And it also has to do with tapping into archetypes, not only for storytelling, but also as role models for connecting with middle segments and silent majorities in society, outside of the noisy extremes. And for that, you need insights. So I'll also show how you can activate those values and those archetypes on very specific topics based on the data. And then I will present several examples. And we've been preparing this also. We look at de-risking investment by having very granular insights into specific target audiences, citizen segments that you can connect with, and how you can do it, and also how you can optimize impact strategies as well when you're an entrepreneur. And you have made those investments, and you need the return on investment, and you need the right media channels and the right retail channels and the right cultural insights to grow in a new market. So I will show also two examples of Investor. I will run it with our AI system that runs on the global research data, just as an example of how you could use it, and the United Repair Center. And then we'll have lots of time, of course, also for questions. So about Glocalities, what do? We look at what's hidden, what's invisible, like the fish doesn't know it's swimming in water. And that is an important principle. So you have to understand more deeply what values are, what cultural aspects are, what motivations and drivers people have, and what is the sprouting impulse in this seed that I just showed. If you understand that, you can facilitate it and create the right circumstances for it to grow. And we connect that in our research with what is visible. So with media behavior, with demographics, with lifestyles. And this we do through research, through data. And if you have this understanding of, for example, a country like Indonesia and women in Indonesia, if you want to reach them on topics such as gender equality, you really have to understand that 90% of people in Indonesia say the father should be the head of the household. And in Sweden, that's only 10%. And so you have to understand these cultural differences. because the moderate middle, the silent middle groups in each country are, of course, different. And if you have this understanding, you can way better build coalitions or movements or create impactful communications and storytelling. So we have been doing this for 10 years at the international level and for 30 years in the Netherlands. And Glocalities is an offspring of and a sister company of Motivaction. This is also where I started my career in 1998, together with the team developing the mentality research program. But later on, our clients asked, well, what about the rest of the world? The Netherlands is such a small country. How can you grow in those countries? Well, it has evolved, and now we cover 65 countries. And also with this AI application that we have built on top of the data, so it's not a hallucinating AI tool, but it runs on statistical significance tests and triangulation. We have built that all in. We can prompt with it, and we can tune into very specific audiences that we select that are relevant for your business, your growth, your portfolio. And what is in the database? Well, here you see it. It has 12 chapters. And we have a values-based segmentation of people who are more achievement-oriented or more conservative or more cultural creatives. We have cultural trends in the study. We have universal archetypes for storytelling. And this is very important to understand because we stand in a long tradition and nothing is new under the sun. You have the caregiver archetype, which is a very primal archetype that you can tap into if you want to foster climate resilience. It's a different way of storytelling than the rebel archetype, which is also a narrative on climate action and Extinction Rebellion. That is an organization which embodies the rebel narrative, which could be effective, but which pushes away moderate middle segments in society. If you have those insights, you can navigate that much more effectively. Because sometimes idealists are in the way, or are the barrier to their own success, to their own scaling, if you don't understand this. And if you have this overall picture, you can implement and develop a theory of change that actually works. Values card, demographics, lifestyles on how to find people online, which is important, of course, for growing businesses, growing in impact. Appeal for different SDGs. And what I heard is that the Sustainable Development Goals are an important compass for generous minds and the community. We have embedded those SDGs in our global research program. So we can tune on those SDGs, but also on 80 other social and environmental topics. From natural disasters to plastic waste, to human rights. All these topics are there, and we can create audiences based on it, and then look at the narrative for storytelling when entering France as a Dutch entrepreneur, for example. And with these type of insights, we already help a lot of organizations, and Motivaction has helped and is helping thousands of organizations in the Netherlands. With Glocalities, we do that at an international scale, both corporates, NGOs, governmental bodies, think tanks, social entrepreneurs. So you can apply this knowledge in many, many ways. So what lies beneath polarization? And that is what the topic is of today. I want to tell you a bit about the Flourishing Fabric publication that I just launched together with the team, because there is another dimension that we discovered in the data. And for that dimension, it doesn't matter if you're conservative or progressive or moderate. It's a human dimension. And it has to do with very basic aspirations and needs and fulfilling purpose. And I think the impact world is navigating that dimension, maybe unconsciously and maybe also intuitively, but we see it in the data. And with that knowledge, you can reach middle groups more effectively. And the discovery in a nutshell is that there is this universal human dimension, which we call disconnection versus flourishing, fragmentation versus the power of renewal. And that is active across the political divides. And we have done a deep dive into the US, and we see that this is relevant among people who are very conservative there, moderate, or very progressive there. And this is also an expression of the, mental health crisis amongst young people. There are people not voting, for example, and those people feel more isolated, let down by society. But in general, there's a very deep longing beneath it that I think as impact investors and entrepreneurs, if you see that, then you see the potential for renewal. And there's a deep longing for reconnection, well-being, a better future in the midst of all crisis and turmoil. And this movement towards flourishing across divides can be activated practically through entrepreneurship, through technology with the right design of AI systems, by connecting with nature and principles of flourishing that are universal, maybe biological, whatever you call it, culture and technology. And I think that is what the impact world is actually doing. And we make it visible. So researching polarization, let me explain that for a bit. So we have a dimension, we call it control versus freedom, that explains polarization within any country. Here you see it expressed in the voting behavior for Democrats or Republicans in the US. In blue, you find Democrat voters. They are more on the very freedom-oriented end of the spectrum. In red, you see the Republican Party voters on the left-hand side, on the control end of the spectrum. So you couldn't say, well, it's conservative versus progressive. And we measure it with statements like I just mentioned, the father should be the head of the household, which is, of course, an indicator for very conservative values. And on the other side, you find tolerance, you find what we call general flexibility, that man can express feminine aspects and vice versa. And what you see expressed, and this is active in the Netherlands, this is active in the whole of Europe. You saw it expressed in the German elections. And Kamala Harris, with her campaign, has gotten votes from the very freedom-oriented minded people. But if you look at the moderates in America, there the Republican Party has a stronger foothold than the Democrat Party, with consequences. So it's very important to be able to navigate those silent majorities and to understand those silent majorities. So the campaign of Donald Trump was better able to even reach people who are like somewhat freedom oriented, whereas the Democrats were more in a specific bubble. And that is the challenge for reaching a breakthrough for more sustainability. You need to connect with different drivers and also with people who are moderate and also with people who have very conservative orientations, but who can be, get on board. But you need to speak to different archetypes, different values, different narratives. And I'll show you how you can do that. But it starts with awareness and with insights and with research. Yes? But then, of course, the question is this all there is? No, this analysis at some point in time hits a limit. Polarization explains worldviews that are ideologies that are opposed to each other. But the question is, how do you deal with it? and it doesn't explain well-being. And it can become a trap with filter bubbles, with echo chambers, with interests that want to preserve the status quo. And there's like a ping pong dynamic going on. And with sustainability and impact, it's, I think, important to transcend that, to outsmart this, and to not be part of only one side of this equation that we just saw. So this is why we turn towards the human experience. We've been researching values for such a long time, and we found about this new or these hidden dimension, nothing is new under the sun. I think we are just rediscovering our basic principle. And we call it flourishing versus disconnection. And in Dutch, you would say ontworteling, vervreemding, disconnection, versus floreren, bloeien, vervulling. And that's a universal need. So what is it? What are we measuring? It's a human movement, and this is cyclical. You see that in nature as well, between isolation, loss of meaning, instability, versus vitality, shared purpose, psychosocial integration. And this is the idea that you can move towards flourishing together if you understand those principles. So how do we measure it? On the disconnection side, it's about people feeling lonely and isolated, wondering about the meaning of life, having the idea, whatever I do, it doesn't make a difference, actually. Feeling trapped. And the flourishing end of the spectrum, you see that people have a shared purpose, which is energizing, which is not necessarily materialistic. It's like there's in a desire to fulfillment or to realize your mission in life. And that's very diverse. It's the feeling connected with others, caring. It's about self-love. That's the third picture. Accepting yourself as you are, which is a journey, of course, which is also know thyself, is what the old Greeks said on top of the Oracle of Delphi, know thyself. And so, and that's, I'm a researcher, so it's a journey, but if you discover this, you see these ancient truths reflected. It's about connectedness, but also about feeling connected with nature. And that helps move towards flourishing, reconnecting. Okay, so once you know this, once you measure this, you can see with what other values this correlates. And that is in the compass that I just showed, one of the elements is the trends that we measure. And then we see this correlation. So people who feel disconnected are more attracted relatively to violence fascination, feel stressed out, are more on average status and impulsive consumption oriented. They plead for smaller income differences. They feel let down by society. Information maze, information overload is present there. And this expresses itself in many, many ways. We see that people who feel more disconnected, and you can read it in the publication, have trouble sleeping, cope sometimes with loss of appetite. Of course, they feel more hopeless. And the youngest age cohort is overrepresented in that realm. I say they are not really connected to like what we could say the rivers of life or the reservoirs of energy or the reservoirs of renewal that I think a more sustainable economy, society, culture would provide for the young generation, and not only through algorithms but also through human contact. And throughout sectors, because this has to do with business, this has to do with education, this has to do with psychology. It's the ecosystem. And people who feel that they are flourishing are more achievement oriented. are more interested in spirituality, tend to be more religious, tend to be more eco-conscious, involved in the community. Many of the topics that impact professionals are working on. And the question is, how can you make the link with these other middle segments in society? What is an interesting finding is that national pride amongst people who tend to flourish is higher. They feel more rooted in their own culture and society. And that can be combined with feeling like a global citizen. But it's not necessarily the opposite. So that's very interesting, because if you look at regenerative agriculture, for example, it's local. So now we have not only a polarization dimension on the horizontal axis, but another integrative potential dimension vertically. And those are statistically independent from each other. So this means that there's potential for a shared agenda from left to right. And that is an important finding. Then if we go to the data, here we have age cohorts in those two dimensions that I just showed: control, freedom, disconnection, flourishing. And you see that the youngest generation, this is in the US, but also globally, is most at risk. They feel more disconnected, alienated, like uprooted. US average here, and the oldest group is above. And this age gap on disconnection flourishing is twice as large as the horizontal gap. And now all you see in US also that young males having more and more doubts about, well, Donald Trump and the manosphere. So it is possible with the right archetypes and narratives, but you need the granular insight, and you need this awareness, to navigate this. And this youth risk for feelings of disconnection is visible across the spectrum. So here we have the freedom-oriented groups. You see 18 to 24 years old is on the lowest end. In the moderate group, it's the same pattern. Youth are most at risk. And in the control-oriented group also. And you see that the spectrum amongst the freedom-oriented group is even larger, because people who are more conservative have, in general, more anchors through religion, through discipline, etc. But youth everywhere across the spectrum are at risk. What we then found, and I will go to the SDGs, so I'm just setting the stage here, but I think it's important to have this, to understand this, have this analysis as a basis to see the potential for impact. That the group who feels most disconnected also has the strongest longing for wholeness and for renewal. So it's not resignation, it's about communication and creating the right circumstances and tapping into the need for wisdom, compassion, creativity, freedom that is very present among this group. And in the publication, we substantiate it with the figures. But I think a lot of the topics that impact entrepreneurs and investors are working on could utilize this insight for reaching more and broader audiences. But it takes, well, imagination, it takes compassion, creativity, the longing for freedom is very strong, wisdom, reconnection. So the movement towards flourishing can be activated through technology, entrepreneurship, design. And here we have some pictures we designed already 2 years ago when we released a trend study, and we saw that young people are really more and more struggling. And there's this process of the caterpillar becoming a butterfly and struggling to get out of the cocoon. That is what we see. So how to transition then towards flourishing, and what could be the role of impact movements, generous minds, but also, I think, much more broadly than that. And we saw already that there's interest amongst these people who feel disconnected in wisdom, in mythology, and there is this universal hero's journey that Joseph Campbell, famous author, discovered and described in his book, The Hero with 1,000 Faces, and many of Hollywood blockbusters, and also Star Wars, was based on this principle. And that is also, you have the force, and you need to connect with it. It's very popular, and people feel it in a way. But how to do that? And this connection, then, you can interpret as an early signal of transition, a threshold moment, entering the unknown. And I think that's where we are now also in the world. And breakdown often precedes renewal. But with the right conditions, guidance and inspiration, it can turn towards flourishing. And you have all these stages, and I'm not going into it now, and maybe you've read about it already, but we see that this is part of the way to go. And this is why we measure archetypes. So now I get to the data and to impact. Carl Jung wrote about archetypes already and about the individuation process. That's the personal journey towards integrating who you are, in fact, and confronting the shadow and learning from your experiences. And I think as entrepreneurs or investors or students, that is a journey. But there are timeless patterns of meaning. So inspired by Jung, many authors have researched archetypes. And every archetype has a mature expression and a shadow expression also, which is interesting because the shadow side of the ruler is a tyrant, but you also have the just ruler. So it depends on what you embody. The jester, the hero, the caregiver. And just to give an example on climate and the climate movement, Greta Thunberg, she knows everything about the science of climate change. That is part of the sage archetype. It's about intelligence and knowledge. But is that enough to get to the moderate middle groups, to get to silent majorities? No, it's not enough. So you need to connect with other archetypes, or have her in a team of young people who represent these other narratives to be able to create a breakthrough. The rebel archetype, as she was striking from school, that has a notion of being like the rebel. But another narrative that is very powerful on climate action, climate change, is the narrative of the late Pope Francis, for example. He wrote an encyclical, Laudato Si, and he was not embodying the rebel archetype. So you need a broad coalition with various archetypes, and you can think for yourself, well, which archetype did he embody? And we saw in the data, and we wrote an article about it after his passing, that his fans resonate with the caregiver archetype and the innocent archetype, which is a very different type of storytelling. And the caregiver archetype is often connected with local cultures. Pachamama, for example, in South America, or Gaia, the Gaia hypothesis, that is linked to the archetype of the caregiver and maybe even the creator narrative. And so I think you feel this already, but what I'm just saying, you can measure it and you can navigate it. And if it's present in nature, it's present in the data also. And then you can work with it deliberately. So now we go to the database and the tools and the topic of sustainable transition. And the Sustainable Development Goals. So I think the link between the Sustainable Development Goals and these notions of flourishing is that all these goals you can look at it in a technocratic way and measure it on impact, or you can look at it complementary, I guess, through the lens of purpose. And there are also the inner development goals, for example, but those worlds are not brought together. And I think data can bring those worlds together of measurement and intuition and inner development, and then steering more deliberately towards a sustainable future. So then it comes to, okay, who is your audience? You will hear me ask that in the coming half an hour a lot, because that's where it starts. You have to understand your audience. You have to think about that. Of course, what is your cause? What is your identity? And how do you say it? What is your message, your storytelling? Because if you have that, you can test it against these audiences and data, and then you get, you see room for improvement or learnings. And for that, we have this platform and data. So as a background, I think for sustainable transition, it's relevant to showcase a bit of what I presented in 2019 in the Danish Parliament. There was the Move Humanity Congress, and we made an analysis of the global rich. So how to move capital towards sustainable development and realizing SDGs. And what our approach is, tap into psychology, look at values, understand that play. And what we saw is that the top 5% earners globally, that is what we had in the data that we could analyze, and there's a lot of things to learn, are on average older, male, higher educated, more innovation, honor, recognition oriented, more interested in politics, more like old boys network connectors, more achievement driven. And this is a given. This is what we see. The rest of society globally, on average, the 95%, has a different view of economy and what economy should be about. It's more about sharing, being helpful. We also have this paper on our website. You can download it, and then you can look into all the data behind it. Compassion, but there's also more pessimism, pleading for more income equality. Changes are going too fast, so there's a kind of a rich bubble that we see in the data represented. So that's a given. So then if you want to move capital towards a more sustainable future, you have a challenge, because if it's more about sharing and compassion, you have a lot of people who can potentially support you, but there's also this bubble. So what we did is what we often do, we make a segmentation. So then we looked within this rich bubble globally at the people who say, well, income differences should not become smaller. So should we are more exclusive. And these people are more achievement oriented, luxury oriented, recognition oriented, even more competition, career focused, and they worry more about crime and safety, immigration, terrorism, and they tend to build this wall, this rich bubble, make it even tighter, more gated. Whereas there's also the social rich group, and I think that is the group that is very active in impact investing, impact entrepreneurship, in these kind of circles. We call it the social rich, and from the data we learn that they are more focused, of course, on equality, worry about environment, worry about corruption, more involved with communities, more empathy, so they are better able to build bridges with the larger groups in society. And now you get a different picture. So then you look at allies, how to build coalitions, how to communicate, how to get the middle group that is there, also within this rich group, and that's more religiously oriented. So it has conservative traits, but is more compassionate. So this is why I just was telling about Pope Francis route, as that is very powerful if you combine it with the more post-materialistic cultural creatives groups. That could be reaching silent majorities, but you need a different kind of storytelling and different theory of change. So, and I'll go to the platform after this, but I just want to set this stage. So the rich bubble values that I presented first are generally out of sync with funding sustainable transition. It's generally more self-oriented. But we see potential, if you have a theory of change, for a more targeted strategy and campaign. And we would advise to mobilize the social rich first to create momentum. And that is now totally possible also with AI and all the international networks that you are also part of. Persuade the middle rich group for expansion, and continuously engage silent majorities and the young generation in this regard. And you need ecosystem enablers. So this is like an overall strategy that I see is possible based on the psychology, based on the values. So then the question is, okay, nice stories, how do we do it? What kind of data do we have? How does this apply to the themes that I'm working on my business, where I have day-to-day struggles and challenges? And the beautiful thing is that with this global data, you can craft those strategies very efficiently. So what have we done? We have built around this database a platform that is trained on the thresholds and the statistical significant differences. And so it took a while to train this tool based on that. So it's not an LLM model going wild, because you can, of course, always prompt with Gemini or OpenAI or Claude or whatever, Mistral, and you will get always answers. But these answers are not rooted in representative survey data. So you will never know how big a group is or if it's really relevant for your business or not. And those are the questions that we are answering, of course, already for decades as researchers, as market researchers. That's where we are focused on. And so now we are enabled with AI. And with this, you can optimize, co-create strategy, communication, a very tailored citizen groups, so not abstract personas, no, very tailored groups that are relevant for your business challenges and growth, and taking into account those cultural differences with immediate practical applications. So in a nutshell, these are the countries that we cover. It's a GDPR-proof platform, of course. We are a European, a Dutch company, so it's secure. It doesn't go these results to US-based companies, so it's fenced. And so we need from our clients, and that's sometimes a struggle, the question to be answered. So, okay, who is your audience? And what is your mission? And where do you see potential for growth? And is that actual potential for growth? Which market should you enter next? Those are all kinds of questions that many entrepreneurs, being impact entrepreneurs or not, are struggling with. Where to invest in, which kind of media channels, which kind of social campaigns. So in this platform, you always need an objective, an audience calibration. I will give some examples in a bit, but based on the countries, the values, demographics, and we can also start from the values and then go to the countries, which might, I think, in the impact world be a better strategy than looking at countries, because you want to tap into a specific psychology or mindset instead of looking at national borders. So this is a different lens, or you want to secure the investment that you have made already in a specific country, but fine-tune it in your communications or your brand development. Then we integrate these audience definitions into the platform. Then we have co-creation sessions, conversations with the clients, where we directly test those positioning claims or concepts or ideas. And then, of course, there's output to be delivered. I want to give some examples before I go to the tool. So for one of our clients, Amnesty International, and there are cases on our website, we are assisting them already for 5 years. So then the question is, okay, nice stories, how do we do it? What kind of data do we have? How does this apply to the themes that I'm working on my business, where I have day-to-day struggles and challenges? And the beautiful thing is that with this global data, you can craft those strategies very efficiently. So what have we done? We have built around this database a platform that is trained on the thresholds and the statistical significant differences. And so it took a while to train this tool based on that. So it's not an LLM model going wild, because you can, of course, always prompt with Gemini or OpenAI or Claude or whatever, Mistral, and you will get always answers. But these answers are not rooted in representative survey data. So you will never know how big a group is, or if it's really relevant for your business or not. And those are the questions that we are answering, of course, already for decades as researchers, as market researchers. That's where we are focused on. And so now we are enabled with AI. And with this, you can optimize, co-create strategy, communication, a very tailored citizen groups, so not abstract personas, no, very tailored groups that are relevant for your business challenges and growth, and taking into account those cultural differences with immediate practical applications. So in a nutshell, these are the countries that we cover. It's a GDPR-proof platform, of course. We are a European, a Dutch company, so it's secure. It doesn't go these results to US-based companies, so it's fenced. And so we need from our clients, and that's sometimes a struggle, the question to be answered. So, okay, who is your audience? And what is your mission? And where do you see potential for growth? And is that actual potential for growth? Which market should you enter next? Those are all kinds of questions that many entrepreneurs, being impact entrepreneurs or not, are struggling with. Where to invest in, which kind of media channels, which kind of social campaigns. So in this platform, you always need an objective, an audience calibration. I will give some examples in a bit, but based on the countries, the values, demographics, and we can also start from the values and then go to the countries, which might, I think, in the impact world be a better strategy than looking at countries, because you want to tap into a specific psychology or mindset instead of looking at national borders. So this is a different lens, or you want to secure the investment that you have made already in a specific country, but fine-tune it in your communications or your brand development. Then we integrate these audience definitions into the platform. Then we have co-creation sessions, conversations with the clients, where we directly test those positioning claims or concepts or ideas. And then, of course, there's output to be delivered. I want to give some examples before I go to the tool. So for one of our clients, Amnesty International, and there are cases on our website, we are assisting them already for 5 years. And together with them, we have developed a methodology for getting moderate middle groups on this control freedom dimension on board with for progressive or human rights causes. Human rights causes is actually not progressive, it's just human. But that, requires a specific storytelling to get to moderate groups. And sometimes very activist storytelling pushes people away unintendedly, and you don't want to be more inclusive. And it's very effective. So we have done A/B tests. There are interesting cases there. For countering disinfo, you can also use it because we understand how the authoritarian playbook works, how the troll farms get to people and try to delude people who are, well, vulnerable for this. For a US-based philanthropy, Lumina, we looked at needs, so not in education and not in employment. Young people in the US, more and more young males drop out. And we evaluated outreach communications material. In those communications, there are archetypes visible that might push young men away if you stress those too much. That is interesting. So in each communications, and we could do it with your website or with your campaign or whatever, and I will show you later on how it works in practice. There are archetypes that you represent and narratives for storytelling. And if you get those above the table, then it becomes a deliberate choice. Who do I want to be more inclusive of? Is this a silent group? And how can I reshape my narrative and storytelling if you want it? Because we, of course, would never plead for diluting your mission. You should say true to who you are, but then be aware of who you attract or detract and make a conscious decision of trying to change that or not. So who is worried about climate change, mobilization? We help Friends of the Earth, Milieudefensie. So it depends on your audience. That's the message. You need to understand and know who you are for. So here I asked the tool the questions: how can this Glocalities platform be used practically for optimizing and de-risking the portfolio of investors from, well, generous minds? And then I say, well, focus on Europe and look at the archetypes, and the values and the lifestyles and demographics from the data to substantiate your answer. Should I make it bigger? I can do it. Can you read it? Yeah, also at the back. So it can be used as a market validation portfolio risk reduction tool. Instead of evaluating ventures only on financial forecasts, you can also test whether a startup aligns with the dominant values, lifestyles, and psychological archetypes of European consumers who are most likely to adopt a solution. So it can be a framework for portfolio allocation and reducing market risk. And as I said, now it runs on the segments, but we could do it on any of your audiences that you work on. So for creatives, this group is very culture driven, change oriented, and scores high, of course, on creator archetype, but also on the explorer archetype, which has to do with openness to new experiences, curiosity. Whereas the achievers, and that's the second group that is relevant for impact, the theory of change, investing, the whole ecosystem, it is about, well, you need problem solving, you need action orientation, you need ambition. And they score higher on the hero archetype. So the question is that enough present in your reach out, or do you use moral arguments for a lot? That it can be a combination. And creatives adopt because something is meaningful or culturally progressive, but achievers, and this is how you connect with the moderate, the middle rich group, and not the self-oriented rich, but this middle group, is if it's effective and solves problems. And then we have the sizes of those segments in countries, and we see that in the Netherlands, Sweden, Germany, those are quite strong. So yeah, ventures aligned with those archetypes. will face lower market adoption risk. We can also validate it through the values cards that we have in the study, because this tool is trained to triangulate, not only rely on one data point, but only come up with conclusions if multiple data points point in the same direction. Then we see that freedom, equality, innovation fits with them. So performance and scale, that is relevant for the achievers. And then you get to climate tech, health optimization, etc. So this is through the values lens. But we can also look at it through the lifestyle data. And you see organic food, ecotourism, ecological lifestyle within these groups is much more adopted in comparison with the total of the population. And here you have the numbers. Sometimes it's even double. Yeah, and then we can go on and test the market size, or look at trust ecosystems. Now I'm going to scroll down towards the conclusion, because I want to show some other cases as well. But as an investor, you can secure your portfolio companies on various dimensions. And we could develop a model for this also, for specific types of sustainable startups. Based on the archetypal resonance, we can test it also with the communications to say, well, are these archetypes really present, or can you rewrite some of the messaging, storytelling, copy to and test it in a campaign and then revise it if it doesn't work? It can be very flexible. So instead of asking, is this tech promising, you can ask, does this solution fit the values, archetypes, and lifestyles of consumer groups in the markets we want to scale? So you can choose the best geographic markets for scaling. And as I said, not only based on those segments, I would not recommend it. I'm just showing it for demonstration purposes, because there will be a lot of other things that you would want to calibrate the audiences on. But then we can have this layer. And then it can, well, create a scoring model, etc. Another example that I wanted to show is about Investdoor. And we prepared this.
Sorry. That was my idea.
That was the idea of Sabine. And so I've been pre-prompting, and welcome Roel, that's my other colleague, who is present, who is working a lot on those kind of projects for Investdoor. So the real opportunity is not only identifying who might invest, but it's about matching different types of investment opportunities with the value motivations of investor segments. It's a crowdfunding platform. And so I don't have any background knowledge about Investdoor, so please don't feel offended, but I wanted to test this case. And of course, we always need a proper conversation at the start of a project. Also, what is your goal, etc. But I think still here we have some findings. So matching different types of investment opportunities with the value motivations of different investor segments. In crowdfunding, it's very important, because you want to reach large groups. Then we have tested it for various types of startups. So renewable energy startups fits with creatives and achievers as a second audience. And here it substantiates it why. Creatives are high on climate change concern, trust in science. Achievers are also high on sustainable brand preference, higher income. So creatives combine environmental conviction with intellectual curiosity and systems thinking, while the achievers again look at efficiency and scalable solutions. So then you can frame it in a different way in your communications on the crowdfunding platform or in your campaigns. Climate tech can be the next growth market for achievers. can be systemic transformation for creatives. And you can find these people online, as I said, through their lifestyle interests. That this is a way. And then we can look at, this is for the UK, The Guardian, for example. Then sustainable consumer brands, that's a different combination. Here you have socializers and creatives, and it's more related to lifestyle expression, because the socializer, they are more into pleasure, caring, they are more concerned about animal cruelty. WWF fits very well with the panda bear in their communications, and you'll feel it, but now we substantiate it with the data. And this is a very important and large consumer group. Yeah, I'm going through it fast. I will go to tech or AI startups. There you have achievers and a new segment appearing, the challengers, as a secondary group. They are into action games, tech curious. I also know that, well, they were the early adopters of crypto. And, well, this is... So with this tool, we can together co-create those strategies and learn on the fly. Yeah, then we have social impact or community ventures. Creatives are the core group for that. Human rights concerns, NGO trust, voting for causes. So they are the most activist investor segment. And socializers engage with impact through community belonging and empathy. So for creatives, it's systemic social innovation more as an opportunity. And for socializers, it's community-powered change locally also more. And we know that the creatives are very globally oriented, whereas the socializers are more nationally oriented. So the United Repair Center, and the question was, how can you accelerate the circular repair economy? And also, what are the consequences for the narrative and where scaling opportunities exist? And what I did here, and I'm going to scroll down later, is I took their website, which is only a snippet, but it already detected that there were archetypes present very strongly, but other archetypes underutilized for scaling. So the creatives and the achievers, again, fit with social impact and environmental responsibility. And as you've seen before, cultural change, sustainability fits with creatives. Interestingly enough, here for conservatives, stability and durability and sobriety, those kind of values fit also. Solution-oriented systemic innovation for the achievers. So the cultural drivers of circular fashion, and then it gets back to the data. For creatives, it's the equality value, it's diversity, openness, eco-consciousness. Those people are the cultural legitimizers, sorry. And the achievers are the systemic implementers more. So you can think of broadening this coalition and also talents, and also within your organization. Of course, this has consequences for your employees also, and your team building. At Motive Action, there's a team focused on that, employee workforce development. Here we see the conservatives also, nostalgia, organized life, repairing possessions rather than replacing them, a very important, potential route to take. You can use this for creating the multi-stakeholder ecosystem, also with fashion brands, institutions. Again, linking with those consumption habits. And with achievers, you can look at values that fit with specific brands. So we have also a lot of brands in this database. And I know United Repair Center is working with Patagonia. Patagonia has a very clear brand story that we can also prompt with based on the data in 29 countries or more, and then find the right fit. So what I now want to do is to go to the message testing, because that's a very practical application. I'm going to scroll down. So we see from the data that the caregiver, the hero, and the creator archetypes, those three fit with those audiences. And then I looked at the website. So now I'm going to scroll down to that prompting. So can you test their current communications on the website against this strategy that I just formulated based on the data? And where do you see room for optimization? Well, and then it does it based on the main pages, those pages. And of course, we could do it more in depth in the dedicated endeavor. But we see here that it aligns with the caregiver and hero narratives, and it underutilizes the creator and explorer motivations that can drive those creative consumers. And it does not fully leverage achievers' appetite for scalable innovation and measurable impact, which is a lot of potential. So what works well? The social employment narrative that is strongly present on the website resonates with the caregiver values, for sure. And here we have the supporting data that fits with those segments. And why the refugee employment message is powerful for legitimacy. Where you can optimize, and it's of course always a conversation, but if you communicate repair as a moral duty and not as a new fashion system innovation, you miss out on potential. And the creatives scorely over-index on exploring new things, multifaceted identity. So frame repair as reinventing fashion, not just fixing it, is a direction you can consider. So from repairing clothes reduces waste to we are redesigning how fashion lives. Yeah, and then we look at the achievers, and they respond to performance and scaling narratives. And there you can frame repair as industrial innovation. Yeah, I will go to the conclusion now, and then we have time for more discussion. But the key strategic insight is it currently, with this website, and I'm not judging any campaigns, and it's just a first look, but it activates the caregiver archetype, and that builds trust and legitimacy, and is related to the communities. And I know this is built on those communities locally. But if you want to scale circular fashion, the creators and achievers are important, and you can do that via exploration, innovation. So position repair as the next evolution of fashion systems, and yeah, you will get more people in the ecosystem above. And then it proposes to write homepage messaging, but I didn't do that. So yeah, I think a lot is possible.
What LLMs do you use? What is it built on?
Yes, so we make which LLM
model is used for this?
Yeah. So first I want to say that this is in the Microsoft Azure environment, which is hosted here. And then we use the OpenAI LLM that doesn't go there. That's hosted here. But what we are working, because so far it has way better results than other LLMs if we train it with our data, etc. But we want to work towards being able to integrate more LLMs. And preferably if Europe Mistral is going ahead in the game, we want to migrate towards that. But it would be a pity not to use the best in the game now for scaling impact. So yeah, this is how we work.